Hello, this is Michelle at East Avenue Art, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this watercolor gouache falling autumn leaf. And I started on a little bit of my tracing paper, just a scrap sheet of that. And I prefer to draw not in my watercolor paper because my watercolor paper is 100% cotton and I don't want to damage it too much by erasing. And so, working out my sketch on some tracing paper is a great way to start. And then I can transfer that over to my watercolor paper using this process. So I'm adding some graphite to the back of my sketch, and then I will transfer it over to my watercolor paper just by, tracing over that sketch onto my watercolor paper. And today I'm using 100% cotton. I'm using Arches cold press, so it's like a little bit of a toothier watercolor paper, and I think it'll stand up pretty well to the amount of water that I'm going to be putting here. You can get my sketch on my Patreon for free, so I've included the link in the description. The first thing that I'm going to do once I've transferred over the sketch and added a little bit of washi tape to the edges of my watercolor paper is I'm going to fill in the leaf with a lot of water, and I'm using a bigger brush here because I want to work fast. I'm going to be doing wet into wet, so I'm just kind of laying down a solid wash of just clear water, no paint really added in there. And the reason why I use the bigger brush is because I want to make sure nothing dries, so it's allowing me to work faster because I'm going to be dropping in color and just sort of letting the color do what it wants, but of course the paper has to be wet for that to be the case. And one of the things that I found is when I am painting under a light like I am right here, my it kind of dries a little bit quickly, unfortunately. So I really saturated that. And I'm starting with the lightest color, so sort of a yellow. I wanted this to be like a sort of one of those golden leaves. So I'm going to have a little bit of yellow and some orange and some red in there. So you can see I'm just sort of like dropping in the color. You can even see a little bit of, I'd like this to be a little bit damper at this point, which is somewhat frustrating. I think I had my spotlight a little bit too close to the paper, so you can see it's creating some harsher edges than I wanted. But of course, as I'm adding in the paint, that is kind of re-wetting everything. And one of the things I wanted to do was really start around the tips, adding in sort of the darker color. And you'll see me kind of move between orange and that deep crimson red to sort of, I guess, have a little bit of a mix of color. But I'm trying to do it like as randomly as possible because one of the things I like about nature painting is it doesn't really have to be super perfect, right? I mean, there's not like sort of a consistent way that a leaf's color appears or changes in the fall. So I sort of appreciate that. It's a little bit more freeing. So I'm kind of going for a little bit of inconsistency here. So I'm just going to be moving around the exterior of the leaf and dropping in that darker sort of orange and then adding in red here and there. And because the leaf is mostly still damp, it's really sort of kind of blending out as it wants to. And that's the joy of watercolor, is just kind of like letting it, I guess, sort of evolve. Sometimes I'll like smooth it out a little bit, which you saw me just do. And that's for like areas where maybe it's a little bit drier than I wanted. I think one thing I might have thought about doing is actually adding a little bit of dampness to the back of the watercolor paper just to keep the paper damper for longer, especially because it's under this like really white hot light. So I'm going to be doing something. I have a little bit of a point on the bottom of this brush, and this is where I'm adding in this the veining of the leaf. And so I just really light pressure dragged that kind of more um, pointier edge on that one brush I had along just the, really lightly in the areas where I would see some veining. And then I'm just going back in with a little bit of the orange paint. And you see I'm gonna, yeah, the other brush didn't really work as well for that. So you see I'm kind of going back, adding a little bit more veining off of those main veins that I added. And so this is like a really cool way that you can get some of that like subtle veining in on a leaf. If you have a little bit of a point on the back of your, or the, the other side of your brush. And so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. But I kind of thought that there should be um, a little bit of darker color along the veins. I think when I've looked at leaves before, I can see that their color change seems to stem from that. And then on the edges as well. So I'm just kind of like futzing around, adding a little bit of darker paint where I see fit. And again, this is still pretty damp. It's not wet, but damp. So you can see when I drop in some color, it will spread around a little bit more. But unfortunately, I'm having to help it out more than I would like to, because I just must not have worked fast enough, or it's that, light that's overhead is just drying things too fast. Okay, so one thing that's really important is I let my leaf completely dry before I started it on the background. And for the background, I mixed up an indigo and a blue at the top of my palette. And then the second color I included was a little bit more of a green. So there was like kind of some green and teal elements. And I'm trying to get sort of how the leaf would look in a puddle. And so again, I'm adding a ton of water, and I'm using my bigger brush again. I want to kind of move as quickly as I can because I don't want a lot of have a lot of like harsh edges. I think I started maybe with a little bit too much paint on my brush, and then as I progressed, I thought, it's probably not a good idea because, again, under these hot lights that I'm using for filming, it's probably all going to dry a lot more quickly than I want. So you can see I've sort of transitioned into, mainly just using a really light green, and but really trying to focus on dropping in the water as fast as I can. And just kind of this combination of dropping in water but also dropping in paint, with a lot of water on my brush at the same time, is giving you that like blooming effect that you see on the like left hand of the screen right now, in the kind of more blue section. And I actually like that. I don't always like water blooms, but in this case, I think it kind of works for the kind of painting that I'm going for, where it's going to look like a little bit like puddles and sort of some splashing in the puddles. So I feel like sort of the blooms kind of work there. But I really struggled with the water drying a lot faster than I wanted to. So I'm just constantly, you can see I've got a ton of water on that brush. I'm laying down a ton of water and just really not getting the blends that I love unless I do that. And so I keep adding, sort of some paint to my brush. See, that should just be spreading out a lot better than it is, and it's not. So now I'm having to spread it with my brush instead of, the water doing the work for me. And I'm also loading up some more. I never really am great about this as far as just like having enough on my brush. And you see I'm dropping in just like dabs of water, and now I'm just kind of going in with like lots of water, lots of paint, just trying to build up this color, trying to get a little bit of a natural look to this. But it's a little bit frustrating. So you can see I'm kind of playing around with what's on my palette, and then I'm dropping in like kind of clean water sometimes in some places because I'm just trying to get lots and lots of blooms and different variations of the color to achieve that puddle effect that I'm going for. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge here. But again, it's really necessary for that leaf to be completely dry before I attempted this, because if it wasn't, I would end up having kind of a muddy mess where my leaf color would be blending in with these pretty blues and greens, and I'd lose the whole leaf shape. So that's kind of like the number one thing to remember if you're a beginner about watercolor, is that just make sure that if any area you're painting on is touching another area that you've painted and you don't want it to blend together, you've got to make sure things dry up. And one thing I do if I'm in a hurry is I will take a hair dryer. Some people have heating tools. I think a hair dryer just works fine, just to make sure that it's like fully dry. Because sometimes it's tough to tell, actually. It'll look dry, it'll even feel dry to the touch, but in this case, I think I would have really lost a lot had I not ensured that it was completely dry before I started doing the background. So now that I've kind of explained my process, I'm just going to stop talking and let you sort of watch how this unfolds. So at this point, I pulled out my gouache set. I have the Himi jelly gouaches that I've recently got, and I have very similar pulled out colors that are very similar to the palette that I already have. And you can see I'm taking this kind of dark, almost like navy indigo blue in my gouache set, and I'm going around the exterior of the leaf, and I'm just adding a little bit of a shadow so that the leaf looks like it's sitting on the puddle rather than sort of all of it being a part of the puddle. So that's sort of adding a little bit of dimension to my painting. And the reason why I used gouache, it's a medium that I'm still really learning. I'm mostly using it to supplement my watercolor paintings, but you can paint with gouache on its own, and a lot of people just really do beautiful paintings with it. I'm still kind of learning, so I'm using it to supplement my watercolors at various points. And one of the ways that you can do that is because gouache is very watercolor-like, but it has a thicker consistency, almost like an acrylic, but not quite. It has the same properties. At least if you're using watercolor gouache, it has the same properties as watercolor. It's activated by water. It's just a little bit thicker, so I can put it over the watercolor there and it will sort of stand out. So you'll see I'm kind of using a lighter kind of a blue, gray, white right here to show the puddles. And if I just tried to use white watercolor paint, that would not stand out against this darker color. I mean, of course, with watercolor, you always have to go light to dark. That's why in this painting, I started with my lightest color, the yellow. If I tried to have painted yellow over that sort of rust orangey red, it wouldn't show up, right? The advantage to using gouache is you can layer lighter colors onto darker colors, and in the same way that you can do with acrylics. But the thing I like about gouache more than acrylics is it doesn't have like the issue of drying. I think with acrylic you have to sort of work fast, and I'm not the fastest worker. I have to speed up my videos actually to show you know, a reasonable pace, I think, as I'm painting. So as you can see, I'm trying to show like the little ripples that you would have coming off of the leaf just having fallen into this puddle. And I'm doing that with these kind of scribbly white lines going around the leaf. And I'll just let you watch my process as I do that as well, and as I continue to sort of build up the rippling and the rippling effect of the water. So one additional thing that I did in this painting with my other gouache colors is I went over the veining, so you can see there's like a little bit of a darker bit to the veining. I thought that was needed. And so yeah, I've pulled off my washi tape, and here's my final product. So I hope you liked this tutorial, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching.